Okay, part 2. We come then to the edge of the promised land. Joshua is the leader, and Joshua, which of course is the name of the next book as well, then leads the invasion into the land. There you've got the Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Galilee is the Dead Sea, which is something like that. And they come in from around about here. During that time, two of the tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, make a deal that they will actually occupy this side of the Jordan. But they say, we'll still come into the land and help you with the battles with the Canaanites inside that land. It's instructive to realise too that when we think about these people invading Canaan, this was also a judgment of God on Canaan. And at one particular time, God says to Israel, it's not because you're particularly good that I'm giving you this land, but it's because the inhabitants of the land are particularly evil that I'm meting out judgment upon them. And in this particular case, Israel was to be the means by which judgment would come upon the Canaanite people. When you look at some of the practices of the Canaanites, you realise just how evil they were. The Canaanites were sort of loose group of tribes and kings, and these kings to the north combined together to come against the forces of Israel as they crossed the Jordan. Once again, a crossing on dry land. As the Jordan dries up, they're able to go across. They leave marker stones there to remind them of how God had brought them across on dry land into the promised land. They have battles with the northern part, with the kings of the north, and they have battles then with the kings of the south who also combine. So it's like there are two particular areas where this fighting takes place before they basically conquer the land. During this time, of course, there's the famous story of the battle for Jericho. And Jericho is the first one, just really over the river, so it's not very far, across the Jordan into the promised land. And Joshua sends spies into the city. They go to the prostitute Rahab, and she keeps them safe. She obviously has some sort of faith or some understanding that God has given this land to the people. She keeps them safe and helps them to escape when it's found that there are these two strangers who wandered into Jericho. They give her a sign that she can use, which is a cord from the window. They will know when they come against Jericho that the people within that particular room are safe. Once you get in, you've got this sort of little story that speaks to us of salvation, the red cord and the being safe within, rather like the Passover story, and also it's that sort of salvation thing coming through once again. Rahab keeps them safe, helps them to escape. You remember that the people of Israel are told to march around the city, these huge walls with actually buildings on tops of the walls or built into the walls. And after days of going around, they blow their trumpets, there's a great cry, and the walls come down. People talk about earthquake, this is an earthquake area, but the timing is the thing that's important, isn't it? Whether it's earthquake or whether it's simply God just knocking the walls down straight off. Either way, the walls come down at that particular time as God had given instruction. They're able to take Jericho. Rahab is saved. Rahab becomes part of Israel. Rahab actually becomes an ancestor of Jesus along the way. The land is taken and the people settle in the land. There are parts of the land which are not taken over, and the Philistines later on would be a thorn in Israel's side. On this side there would be various Canaanite groups that would be a problem in the future as well. They make treaties with certain people, and there's a lot of sort of intrigue that goes on in there as well. But basically the tribes of Israel are able to settle in various areas. They keep their own tribal areas. They become their lands. Most notably, you've got Judah down to the south here. And I think Benjamin or Dan is somewhere up here in this little corner here, Ephraim and Manasseh on the other side of the Jordan. So they settled the area, the whole area of the tribes settled in the land. From Joshua, we then come into the time of the judges. Time passes. The people worship God, but there's no central place. People just worship God wherever they are. They have their priests, so they have priests in these various areas as well, and they help with the worship, but there's no sort of centralised area or anything like that, particularly at this time in the way that there would be later on, in the same way that there would be later. So the time of the judges is a time of going over cycles. The people tended to turn away from God. And as they turned away from God, then they started to take on idolatry and all sorts of other practices of the people who were still living in the land, the people they had not expelled from the land. And so they were corrupted by the peoples around them. They would turn away from God, and as a punishment, God allowed them to be invaded then by neighbouring tribes of various sorts. As I said before, the Philistines would become the major one, but there were others as well who would attack from the north and from other areas around Israel. So attacks took place. The people would suffer from these because they weren't really soldiers, they were just sort of farmers who by this time had settled in the land, and they sort of got fat on the land, and they weren't the people they'd been when they'd been invading back here under Joshua. So there were these attacks that took place, and as these attacks took place, people began to suffer, and they called out to God to help them. They turned back to God. The suffering made them come to Him. And as they called out to God, God then raised up a leader, charismatic leader with a small c, somebody who was able to draw all these tribes together into a cohesive army to get people, was able to inspire people. Those leaders were known as judges. Now, sometimes there would be judges in the way that we understand, where they would settle arguments and so on, but broadly speaking, the time of judges is the time of the raising up of leaders who were able to inspire and draw people together. So the judges would then lead the people. They would conquer their enemies. They would have a time of peace, which could be 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, and then they would start to turn away from God again. They'd go into the cycle, and then they get attacked. So notable people during this time, notable leaders, were people like Ehud. He's a left-handed man. Really gory story, if you like gory stories. You'd like to frighten your children. Ehud, then there was Gideon, who was probably maybe the most notable. Remember that Gideon was down in a pit, and for fear of attack, he was doing all grain. The angel appears to him and says, "Go and pull down the statue in the town, the statue to the god in town." He's a bit nervous about this, but he goes and does it. And I think it's only his father or his father-in-law or somebody who says to him, says to the townspeople, "Well, this God surely should be able to look after himself and punish Gideon if he's done the wrong thing." So he's able to talk him around. Gideon then becomes a leader who gathers people together. In fact, as he gathers people together, he gets rather too many people. God says, "You've got too many people. Talk to them, send them home, the people who don't really want to go and fight." So he sends them home, and he's left with a much smaller number, and God says, "You've still got too many." He says, "Take them down to the river and get them to drink," and as they drink from the river, the ones who hold the water up to their mouth, you keep them, and the ones who lap down into the water and send them home. And Gideon finished it up with 300 people against a large army of Midianites. And with those 300, God says, "Okay, surround the camp, go around the camp with those 300, give them a pitcher, like a jar, with a torch, not a battery torch, but a flaming torch. hide the torches, have some others with trumpets. When he gave the signal, when Gideon gave the signal, they were to break the pitchers, they were to wave the torches around, they were to shout, the trumpets were to blow. The Midianites in the middle of the night were thrown into panic. Most of them killed each other, and there was very little left for Gideon and his men to do. The people then wanted to make Gideon king. He refused to do that. He said, no, God is your king, and God is the one who keeps us together. We are a theocracy. God is the one who is in charge of us all. He is the one who keeps us as tribes. He's kept us so far. He's delivered us. He will be able to do that into the future. Gideon refuses to be king. Gideon, as I say, is one of the most notable ones. So you've got Ehud, Gideon, you've got people like Barak and Deborah. Deborah, who was a prophetess, and she says to Barak, God's calling you to lead the army. Barak says, I want you to come along as well. She says, very well, but you won't get the glory for it. And once again, God gets the enemy chariots are caught in the rain and the floods, and they're bogged down in the mud. And once again, great victory for Barak and Deborah. And it's another lady at that particular time, another nice gruesome story, Jael, who finds the fleeing general, Sisera, and puts a tent peg through his head. Invites him in, says, come and have something to eat and drink. And when he lies down to rest, she executes him. Lovely lady. That comes out at, this is Deborah and Barak. And then, of course, you've got the stories of Samson and Delilah. Samson, of course, was a Nazarite. Nazarites were set up during the time of the going through the wilderness. God said to Moses, have these people who are Nazarites, they will grow their hair, they won't have any alcohol. They will be conspicuous in Israel by the way they look. So when people see them, they will remember that they too are supposed to be a separate people, are a strange people, people apart from everyone else. And the Nazarites will be reminders of that. Sometimes I think today, when we clergy wear our collars and things, that we should be performing the same sort of function. If we're wearing a cross or a collar or something like that, it's to remind people about God, to remind people that there is another reality around. Some people have said the same thing about cemeteries. The fact that there are cemeteries around is a good thing because it reminds people of their mortality. Well, amongst the Israelites, the Nazarites performed that function of reminding the people that they were a special and holy people, that they were different from others. So Samson was a Nazarite, and Samson had great strength as he obeyed God, as he did what God wanted him to do. You remember that Delilah fools him and gets him to confess where his strength lies. His strength lies not just in his hair, it's not just in a haircut that weakens him, but the fact that that was part of his vow, that was part of his relationship with God. And when that relationship, when he failed to keep his vow, when he failed to keep that relationship with God, he lost his strength. His strength wasn't in his hair, but in the covenant relationship that he had with God himself. And Samson is weakened and able to be taken captive by the Philistines, and eventually he's chained up, his eyes are gouged out, and all that horrible stuff that takes place at that sort of period. He's in a temple area between two pillars, and he calls upon God to give him one last bit of strength. And he pushes those pillars over, the whole thing, the whole balcony and everything else falls on him, but it also falls on the Philistines. I think about 2,000 of the enemy were killed at that particular time as well. So once again, bloodthirsty days. Some really terrible stories come out of that sort of period, but part of the scene of that day, of the culture of that day. And incidentally, when we think that, they were just animals back in those days, that were just terrible people, you only have to look around recent history around the world today and find nothing's changed much. Towards the end of the time of Judges, there's this wonderful little book called Ruth. The story of a Moabitess, of Naomi, who goes over the border from the area around Bethlehem, from Bethlehem over into Moab, and her sons marry. One of them marries Ruth, and then Naomi's husband dies, Ruth's and the other lady's husband die, well, the two sons die. So basically Naomi is left without her sons and with two daughters-in-law. One of the daughters-in-law stays in Moab. The other one, when Ruth says things have improved now in Bethlehem, we're going to return to Bethlehem, says, I will go with you. Where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God, your people will be my people. And she goes back with Naomi, and they settle in Bethlehem. Ruth finishes up, as the story goes, wonderful story again, but finishes up marrying Boaz. They have a son, Obed. Obed has a son, Jesse. Jesse is the father of King David, David the king. So Ruth, the foreigner, becomes part of Israel, just as Rahab did. Rahab the prostitute from Jericho, a foreigner, becomes part of Jesus' family. So does Ruth, the Moabitess. So you've got that takes place at the end of Judges. The last judge of all is probably Samuel. You've got the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And Samuel is apprenticed to Eli the priest at Shiloh, the tabernacle. And remember that God speaks to young Samuel and says to young Samuel, I'm going to bring judgment upon Eli. And remember that it was in the middle of the night and Samuel could hear this voice and calling his name. He goes into Eli and says, what did you want? Eli says, go back to bed, it wasn't me. It happens on the third time that Eli realizes it's God speaking to. It says to Samuel, say to the voice, when the voice says, Samuel, Samuel, say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. And that's when the message comes through. Eventually Eli dies, the sons die, Eli's sons die, Eli dies, and Samuel takes over the leadership. He, in the sense, is the last of the judges. He's the last of the charismatic leaders of Israel of that sort. He's also a priest at the same time, so he's a spiritual leader of Israel too, and he probably, of all over that period, he gathers Israel together. It's during his time, of course, that Israel then says to Samuel, we want to have a king like the other nations. One of the reasons they wanted a king was that the Philistine threat was becoming so great that they felt they needed somebody who would gather an army sufficient to get beyond the Philistine threat. Samuel is very upset by this. He says, God should be your leader. You should trust God. He's always helped you thus far. You shouldn't need a leader. Samuel appeals to God. God says, give them what they want, warn them. If the leader is good, then things will go well for them. If the leader turns away, then things will go badly for them. And so eventually Samuel gives in and he appoints the person that God has picked out. He doesn't just go and pick anybody, he doesn't have an election. God speaks to Samuel and says, I want you to appoint Saul. Saul is appointed. And Saul goes off and runs and hides. Saul is a tall, good-looking fellow. He's very shy to begin with, and yet he takes over leadership, and he has an anointing from God. He's prophesying along with the prophets and all of that sort of thing. All of these things happen to Saul. And as he's anointed, as he's made king, he then leads the people against the Philistines. Along the way, though, it soon becomes evident that Saul wants to do things his own way. On one occasion, he's told to destroy all the cattle in a particular city. doesn't do that. On another occasion, he offers a sacrifice which only the priest was supposed to offer, and he becomes impatient. He goes about things his own way. God starts to lose patience with Saul, and he says to Samuel, Saul is going against me. I want you to appoint the next leader after Saul. And Samuel goes to Jesse, and once again, this is God's leading, and he says to Jesse, God has sent me here, bring your sons before me, one of these is going to be the next king. And he brings all his sons before him, and Samuel looks at one and says, surely this looks like the right one. God says, no, not that one. God doesn't look on the outside, but God looks on the heart. He looks at what's on the inside. And at the end, Samuel says, you got no more sons? He says, oh, we've got David out there, he's out looking after the sheep. Bring him in. And of course, as soon as David comes in, Samuel knows that he's the one. And so Samuel anoints David, but David doesn't become king straight away. In fact, we've got the story then of David and Goliath killing the giant, and it's there that David comes in contact with Saul. Saul sees the potential of David. David becomes one of Saul's generals, and he also becomes more popular than Saul in the process, because when David goes out into battle, David wins his battles. Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. So David is a great hero. And Saul becomes jealous. Somebody who really didn't want the position to begin with is now holding on to it with all his might. And he goes into rages, talks about the spirit coming upon Saul. He's becoming unhinged as he goes along. He tries to kill David on a couple of occasions. David gets away. David becomes an outlaw. He gathers a band of people to him. He goes through various adventures, all sorts of adventures that David goes through. And during these adventures, he has an opportunity to kill Saul. But he doesn't take that opportunity. He's encouraged by his general to do so. He says, no, I can't kill the one that God has anointed. He is the Lord's anointed, and I have no right to take his life. God will do things. The whole idea was that God will do things in his own time. God will do things when he is ready. And so David, by doing this, was also, in a sense, preparing for a future where he would be able to combine the northern kingdom, which was really saw itself as under Saul, and Judah, which in a sense later would align itself with David. And he was able to combine the two because he didn't jump in and kill Saul and take over. He let God do this. And so David eventually, after a period of time, many adventures, one where he had to, he pretended to be mad. He went over to the Philistines. He pretended he was on their side, doing this sort of double agent thing. Lots of incredible adventures when you think about all the stuff that he went through. He gets married during this time as well, and there's wonderful stories that happen during this time. David then, Saul dies, Jonathan dies, great friend of David, son of Saul. These two were sort of inseparable friends. And Jonathan dies. David grieves for Saul and Jonathan. It was, I dare say the grief was genuine, but it was also a good move anyway, because people saw that he was not grasping for power himself. And that, again, helped to unite North and South. And the people of the North said, yeah, okay, we're willing to make you our king, to recognise you as our king as well. So David then becomes the greatest leader, the greatest king in the history of Israel. David, who's come through from Ruth, of course, therefore his hometown is Bethlehem. David's town, Bethlehem. And David, during his reign, not only gets rid of the Philistine menace, but he also sets up Jerusalem. He takes Jerusalem and sets it up as his capital city. This is where Jerusalem comes in. He has designs for a temple, but God says, no, you're not going to be the one who built it. You're a man of blood. This temple will be built in a time of peace. The design of the temple is given to David, but he's not the one who's going to build it. David, of course, is also a very fallible person. You remember that he saw Bathsheba. He desires Bathsheba to be somebody else's wife. He takes Bathsheba and sleeps with her. She becomes pregnant. He wants to cover up the pregnancy. He finds Uriah, who is Bathsheba's husband. He's a soldier in the army. Has Uriah put up at the front of the fighting, and then gets the others to withdraw so that he's left exposed and he's killed in battle. So David engineers the death of Uriah as well as committing adultery with Uriah's wife. David thinks all is hidden, but the prophet comes to David and tells him a little story about a man who took the only lamb of this particular farmer so that he could, even though he had lots himself, so that he could feed somebody. David is outraged at the story, and he's told by Nathan the prophet, you are the man, you're the one who did this, who's done this thing. And David is full of regret. The child dies, but Bathsheba does give birth to another, and this particular one is Solomon. Solomon takes over the kingdom, and if you see the map under David, you realise that his kingdom, by the time he conquered it, went right up here, all the way down here, and down towards Egypt, onto the Sinai Peninsula. It was a huge area, so they were the sort of key, that was the key empire at the time. They were the force in the world, in that world at that particular time. Solomon enjoyed a time of peace, and under Solomon, the temple is built. He builds a palace, which is even bigger than the temple, and he is fabulously rich. He has many wives and concubines. The Queen of Sheba comes to visit, and she is shown around, and she says, the half had never even been told me. This is so much more magnificent than I could ever imagine. Solomon, towards the end of his reign, takes on so many wives from all sorts of other countries, partly because of treaties. You make a treaty with somebody, you seal the treaty, not the daughter of the king. So he set up lots of temples and shrines and all sorts of other things, and then found that he was starting to drift away from God himself. So he's somebody who starts off so well, and when God asks him, what do you want from me, at the beginning of his reign, says, I don't want fabulous wealth, but I do want wisdom. And God says, because you are so well, I'll give you the wealth and all the rest of it as well. But somebody who started off with such wisdom then finishes up being away from God and drifted away from God. It's a great tragedy of Solomon's reign. You get that story in the middle of Solomon's reign where two women come to him. One has a baby, and the other says, she stole my baby. She rolled over on her baby and killed her baby accidentally, and then took my baby, and that's really my baby. And Solomon's got these two women claiming the same baby. No DNA testing in those days. And Solomon says, bring the baby, take the baby, cut it in half and give half to each. And the mother, one of the women says, no, give it to her. Great wisdom. What a shame he finished up the way he did at the end. Solomon's son was Rehoboam. put a star up there because Rehoboam is the son of Solomon, son of David, so he takes the Davidic line. Rehoboam then took over from Solomon. And as Rehoboam leads the people, he starts to treat them worse than his father Solomon had done. And what Solomon had done, of course, was to enforce labour on people, to build all the infrastructure and all the stables and the palace and the temple and all those sorts of things. People had to work hard to do that, fulfilling the prophecy that Samuel had given to them. If you want a king, you're going to find that he'll tax you, he'll do all these things, he'll work you hard, he'll take your sons for the army, and so on. And it's exactly what happened. Rehoboam treated the people badly. The people of the north in particular, and one Jeroboam, came to him and said, look, if you're going to keep doing this, people are going to rebel against you. Please, treat us better than this. We deserve better. Rehoboam went and consulted first a group of older people, experienced people, who said, go easy on these people, otherwise you're going to lose them. But then there were another set of people, his peers, that he went to, and they said, these younger people said, work them harder, to make them suffer. And Rehoboam listened to his peers rather than the older, more experienced people, and he worked them harder and caused a split which led to ultimately to civil war between the north and the south. So you've got this map then of Canaan, which with the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom became generally known as Israel, but it gets a bit confusing when you're reading the scriptures, because sometimes Israel refers to all the people of God, and sometimes in this particular period it's being referred to as this northern kingdom, whereas the southern kingdom was known as Judah, sometimes known as Judea. It was known as Judah, where Jerusalem was. Now Jeroboam, once the split takes place, this is the northern kingdom, once the split takes place, he sets up shrines up here so that people won't go down to Jerusalem to worship. So once again, you've got a division now in where people are going to worship, and a division in the whole approach to God. It's a division which, of course, persists later on, and you see it reoccurring as a Samaritan woman talks to Jesus and says, we Samaritans believe that we should be worshipping on this mountain, but you people say that it should be in Jerusalem where we worship, which is the right place. So you've got this split that takes place. There's war that goes on between the two. There's a whole series of kings that come down under Rehoboam. Lots of them were evil. Some of the notable ones, just reading off the sheet here, some of the notable ones were Jehoshaphat, famous for the song, Jehoram, there was Joash, who was there for 40 years. There were some of the good ones. There was King Uzziah, while Isaiah was around, Jotham, Hezekiah later on. There was Manasseh, who was an evil king. There was Josiah, who brought in tremendous reforms. They had actually lost the law. But Josiah brought in reforms. They built the law again when they were repairing the temple. And the people repented, and Josiah tried to bring about changes in Israel, to bring people back again and to restore the law. And so the line continued, the line of David continued with only one little hiccup when Athaliah from the northern kingdom, daughter of Jezebel, became queen down in Jerusalem. It was only a temporary hiccup. And then the line reverted back to David's line again. In the north, however, they were changing kings, soon to be changing kings every few months. Well, it was more than that. So Baasha went for 24 years, but there was a 2-year reign, it was a 7-day reign, 12 years, another 2 years a bit further down. There were people like Jehu, Jehoram. Some of the most notable ones were Omri, who brought in Baalism, and particularly Ahab, King Ahab, who married Jezebel. And Ahab and Jezebel helped really to corrupt the people to Baalism. Now what God did during this period of the kings, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, what God did during this period, of course, is to send prophets. In times of crisis, God sends his messengers to people. So during the time of Ahab and Jezebel, you've got the prophet Elijah. And you've got that great contest on Mount Carmel, where the fire comes down from heaven and consumes the sacrifice. The prophets of Baal try to bring fire down, and they fail miserably. The 400 prophets are put to death. The Jezebel threatens Elijah's life, and Elijah runs for his life. And says, it's all over, it's all over, it's all finished. And God says to him, I've maintained prophets within Israel. You go back and you anoint Jehu, and from there you will see that I'm in control, not Jezebel. Jezebel is killed, so is Ahab. Elijah prevails in all of that. Elijah passes on his mantle to Elisha. Once again, you've got great stories associated with those prophets. And this is the time of the prophets. Towards the end of this, you've got Amos and Hosea, who also are prophets both of doom and a little bit of hope, particularly with Hosea. Amos is a prophet of doom. He says, the end is coming. And the end did come for the northern kingdom. Eventually they were taken into exile, and that happened in 722 BC. They were taken into exile to Assyria up north. It was much later on that the southern kingdom was then taken captive. They lasted much, much longer, and it was around about 597 BC that the southern kingdom, because they had evil kings as well, and the southern kingdom was taken off, not to Assyria this time, but by that time Babylon had become the world power. So they went across, remember that Fertile Crescent? They went right across, Babylon's on the other side, but it's sort of up here, on that Fertile Crescent from the land of Canaan. And there are 70 years that these people go in two waves. There's 597 and 586. The cream of the people of Jerusalem were taken in 597. Later on, 586, they come back again and take everything and raise the whole place. They left puppet kings there after the first invasion. Second invasion, they left nothing at all. People like Daniel were taken into exile during the first one. So you've got the book of Daniel and the stories of Daniel, the visions of Daniel, the writing on the wall of Belshazzar, the stories of the madness of Nebuchadnezzar turning mad, Daniel being able to tell the dreams of these people and interpret the dreams just as Joseph had done centuries before. Daniel was able to do the same sort of thing. Daniel sees that vision of the kingdom of God, of the great statue of the kingdom of God being set up, and you're able to actually calculate in Daniel from the time of Daniel through the years. You can take it to the time of Christ and see the kingdom being set up at that time. So Daniel around about 600 BC or thereabouts. Then through the time of exile. The time of exile lasts for 70 years. You've got that wonderful story of Esther during that time. And Esther reads like a melodrama. And Queen Esther, who's Jewish, comes to power, finds out this plan of Haman to kill off the Jewish people. And engineers it so that Haman and the king are together one night. She puts on a feast. And during the time of the feast, she reveals the plan. The story is a wonderful wonderful story of coincidences. Because God's name is never mentioned, but you know that God is in it all the time. And the Jewish people are delivered in the end, and Haman is hoisted on his own gallows, the gallows that he had put up there for Mordecai, for Esther's uncle. But wonderful story, great reading, and it would make a great melodrama, right? Just imagine, all the characters coming out and people going, "Woo! Hooray!" for these characters in Esther. That was, those stories were tremendously encouraging stories to the people in exile, to the people who had lost everything, and to know that they had hope. And then you've got prophets like Isaiah and parts of Jeremiah and Ezekiel saying things are going to be restored, things are going to come back. Jeremiah saying, God's saying, I'll put a new heart within you. Isaiah saying, comfort my people. Don't look to the old things. I'm going to do something new. I'm going to restore the people. And at the end of the 70 years, God says, yes, that's enough. And it's Ezra, the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, which are in the wrong place, by the way, in the Bible. They should be, I think they should be towards the end. But Ezra and Nehemiah lead the people back to the land, to rebuild the temple, to put everything back together again, to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And the people return and settle in the land. And then you've got another period of about 400 years between the Testaments, the coming and going of various nations. There is the Roman invasion that takes place towards the end of that, and that sort of ushers in the time when Christ comes into the world. And that about completes it. We've sort of gone over a few things towards the end. We can do that in very great detail, just not the time to do it. But what I've got here, this is also available incidentally on our website, which you can download from the website if you want to have more copies of it. But there is an outline of the Old Testament. It has, it's got all the books of the Bible written in capitals, in italics. Incidentally, the stories of kings are almost paralleled in Chronicles. Some different stories in Chronicles than you have in Kings, which covers this period of the north and the southern and northern kingdoms. They go, and then you've got the exile. This kingdom goes into exile first, and the southern kingdom goes into exile later. And you've got the various books of the Bible and the prophets that as they occur against those particular kings. So I hope it will encourage you to get in and read some of those stories in full, the stories that we've just sort of brushed over. There's a whole other body of work as well, which comes outside of that salvation history. Now, all of that history, really, that I've told today has been to bring Christ into the scene. And of course, everything that happens from the cross and the resurrection, all those things have been part of that salvation history, the preservation of the Jewish people in order to bring Christ to the world. The promises to Abraham that we saw before were fulfilled then in Jesus Christ. The whole thing comes together in him. And but apart from that salvation history, there is a body of books called wisdom books, which are books on how we are to live. They're wise sayings that have been collected from different places, and they're inserted into the Bible. They don't fit into that sort of salvation history line that we've talked about, but they are there to help us to understand God better, and they're valuable books in themselves. As I said, they don't fit into a chronology as such, but things like Job, which has a lot to do with how we approach suffering and our trust of God, our faith towards God. Psalms, which you know, Proverbs, lots of wise sayings, Ecclesiastes, the emptiness of life from a human perspective, Song of Solomon, a story about love, the beauty of love, which I think is what it's basically about. It's not just about Jesus and the church, which is sometimes put down as, but simply a beautiful poem, if you like, about love of two people for each other. So they're the wisdom books. So you can take one of those. Alongside that is a brief overview of the scriptures, which is basically just a retelling of the stories, not in as much detail as I've told them today, But it basically just goes through, so you've got the stories in chronological order, and it'll probably just